Okay, so I've got Jayne with me today. So Jayne reached out to me after I posted to ask for guests to come on the show, and unbeknownst to me, our dads actually knew each other and really quite well, didn't they?
Yeah.
So obviously your parents' names and that were around my household as a child, and
Yeah,
I'm
same.
not sure if we've ever been to events together, possibly in the sort of circles that they were going in. We
Yeah.
probably played together at some point as
I think
kids.
so, yeah, as
I
kids,
think we're
yeah.
a similar
Yeah.
age. But you reached out to me because I've been asking for people to come to me with like real stories about how they've been affected by either good or bad care, or just from a sort of, I know I struggled as a carer, to actually get things in place. So
Yeah.
do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and like your dad and tell us the story and what happened in your situation?
Yeah, no problem. So my mum and dad are amazing people. I had such a wonderful childhood growing up. My dad was so intelligent, caring, lovely, like a quite quiet guy, really, quite unassuming, but just really supportive and lovely. And, we have 2 children, and he was a really amazing granddad to them, You sit and watch the football with them, really inspired my older one, to get into motorsport and things. They used to sit and watch the racing together, and he was just a really lovely, caring guy. And he got to sort of his early 80s, and it kind of all kind of started when he got diagnosed with prostate cancer to start with.
Okay.
And, he did okay. It was quite an aggressive form, but he was on hormone treatment and he seemed to be sort of doing okay from that. But unfortunately, he just kept getting sort of recurrent UTIs, so a couple of years after that. And then eventually he was sadly diagnosed with stage 4 bladder cancer.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
And sort of went downhill quite quickly. And so, they told us that they were going to try and, remove as much of the tumour as they could, give him a little bit. We never really asked for any timelines or anything. He didn't want to know. He was quite old school and he didn't really want to talk about it, just wanted to sort of get his head down and get on with it. And he was really stoic, really brave. But we were just never sort of encouraged to sort of, he didn't really want to discuss very much about it at all, just deal with things as they came up. So he went into our park originally to have his bladder tumour, debulked as much as they possibly could. But at the end of it, it was kind of like, well, they used to sort of kind of indicate it would be a matter of months more than anything else.
Aww.
So, we brought him home. My mum was amazing, looking after him and things. But I think that was kind of where our sort of care journey really sort of started.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of went from, a point where my mum and dad were fine, they didn't need any kind of help at all, to kind of then starting to think, well, my mum's got to deal with this. I was, and still am, a full-time working parent. I have, a job that's really demanding, and so it wasn't really possible for me to sort of reduce hours or kind of do anything over and above. My children were really small at the time. They were like 6 and 2, so they clearly needed a lot from me.
Yeah.
And my mum was also my backup. She was almost like my...
As often?
We used to call her my nanny nana,
Yeah.
And, my husband was as amazing as he can be as well, but also, he runs a company, full time. So, for us, it was a very full on thing. And I think we started to realise quite quickly we were going to need a little bit of support. But I think when we started to kind of ask questions and look for that, I think it then became really clear quite quickly that maybe where our expectations of where we might be able to get care from or what support we might be able to get was never really going to match, unfortunately. And I think we started to feel the pressure and the stress of that, really quite quickly.
Yeah. And often it's the case, that's what I struggled with as well, was the fact that you're trying to juggle everything.
Yeah.
Plus, not only the physical responsibility of caring for somebody, but the mental toll as well. Like
massive.
Yeah.
It was huge. I think for us, because we realised quite early on this was obviously not going to be, we weren't going to get the happy ending that we all wanted from this. The phrase that I'd never heard before, but became sort of apparent quite quickly, was anticipatory grief.
Yeah, we've talked so much about
that.
Which
was huge. I'd never even thought about it. But that became such a huge thing, certainly on my shoulders, very quickly.
Yeah.
And like I say, it was it was this, and it comes on you because you've got layers of different things. So you've got the actual sort of the pain of seeing that person go through their pain, and wanting to take it away. There's nothing you can do for that. You layer on the fact that you're going to lose them, and then you've then got to layer on all the stress of the fight then that comes with trying to get them the level of care and support that they need and deserve. And then ultimately, there are times when you know that you've done everything you can and you just can't deliver it for them. And that I found really heartbreaking. That really broke me.
I can fully resonate with that. It did with me as well. It's horrendous. Horrendous. You were talking to me briefly about a point where your dad, you had an incident with your dad. Did he have an infection? Is that why he was in hospital?
I think originally it was because, after they removed his tumour, he was sent home, and he was doing okay for a while, but they put a catheter in, which originally was just meant to be like a short-term thing, but then they just, for whatever reasons, medical reasons, they just couldn't remove it. So I think that caused quite a lot of stress, and I think bits of this tumour just kept blocking it. My mum was at the hospital with him. It was kind of like a bit of a cycle. So something would happen and they'd look and catheter wasn't draining. The next thing it would be they'd call the district team out. They'd do their best, and if they couldn't fix it, then he'd have to go to A&E. And that, I think, was again one of the kind of frustrations. We'd have to then go and sort of like take him to A&E, and in the very early days he was just at the back of the queue like everybody else, and it was like we had to then start explaining why he was there from the very basics. And it was just really frustrating. It's just like, is there not some other way? I'm not trying to say that he deserves to be a queue jumper in any way, but it just was really frustrating that they'd just be asking us really basic questions. And I thought, this isn't, it's wasting everybody's time, and we know exactly what he needs. It's probably a 5 to 10 minute procedure, and then he's out the door, and, he could be away. And the longer he's here, the more chance he's got. He's vulnerable, he'll be getting infections and things like this. And it was just incredibly frustrating. But one of the other sort of side effects of all of this was that he had high calcium levels, and so they would need to be treated. And we sort of said, well, is there any way that can be treated as an outpatient procedure? And the answer was very much no. You'd need to be admitted. So again, we would start the process of, somebody would identify he had to go in. We'd then be told we had to call 111 to start that, which was just, again, so really frustrating. It was just a cycle of hospital. Yeah, exactly. And it was kind of like you then just go down a black hole. Eventually we'd get to a point where they did seem to put him on some kind of like fast track list, so at least he wouldn't be left sort of sitting in corridors or anything like that. But before we got to that point, he would just go into the process and into the cycle, and it was really, really frustrating. And it was during one of those admissions that he was very poorly. He was unconscious, basically. And they put him on some kind of like a holding ward. And when he was on there, I think somebody came to my mum, I wasn't there, and spoke to her and said, look, this is accelerating now. This is probably about 8 weeks down the line from after he'd had surgery. And said, look, can we put a DNR in place on him, please? And she said, well, they must have had discussions about that privately and decided, that if it ever got to the point, then they would want the other one to make that decision for them. And so she said, yes, I'll sign it. I think she phoned me and said, is this okay? And I was like, well, yeah, I understand why you would do that. So yes, I'll support that. And so she signed it, and he was unconscious, and they were doing whatever they needed to do to sort out his calcium levels. The expectation was that he would come around and that he would be generally okay again. And during this process, I remember our vicar went and paid him a visit because he was just doing his rounds the hospital, which was really sweet. And he'd even left a little card at the side of the bed to say, look, hi John, I came to see you. Nice. I hope you're okay, but you're obviously asleep, so I'll call back another time. So he wasn't really with it, he was struggling. And unbeknownst to us, during the night, they moved him to a totally different ward. So we went, we would have gone in the next day not knowing where he was. But before we even got as far as visiting that day, my mum got a phone call to say, oh, there's been a little bit of an incident. Can you come up? And she was like, oh my goodness, is he okay? Oh, well, yeah, he's just maybe had a little accident. Could you just come? Yeah, just come up and have a chat with the ward sister. So my mum phoned me and said, you know, I don't know what all this is about. And I said, look, I'll get as much done. I was over in Manchester. I was like, I'll get as much done as I can and I will come home. So the next thing, I got a really hysterical phone call, and she said, he's broken his hip. Oh. I was like, how's that happened? And she said, I'm not entirely clear, but, you know, can you come? So literally, you know, had my company are incredible, and I had an amazing boss at the time, and he was just like, just go, just don't need to worry about it. So I literally just got in the car, raced home, and when I spoke to them, I went up to the hospital and started speaking to the medical staff, and they were like, yeah, we're really sorry, but we think they were getting him washed in the morning, and I don't quite know about the communication, but nobody had seemed to pass notes from one ward to another about the condition he'd been in the evening before. Nobody knew he'd been unconscious. Nobody knew he was at risk of falling. So that was the other thing we'd had. He'd like fallen out of bed. He was quite, obviously, because of the high calcium, he could be quite floppy. None of that had been passed across. They put him in a chair to wash him. I don't know if the assistant got called away, and they left him sat naked in a chair. And he was freezing cold. They left his clothes on the bed. So within reach, but like he couldn't dress himself. So he reached out to get his clothes to get warm because he was freezing. Nobody came, and he fell forward and broke his hip. Oh, that's awful. Which was just horrific. And so, you know, you just think as if he's not been through enough. Yeah. It was awful. And I just thought, oh my goodness, for him, what is this now going to mean? You know, we knew he didn't have lots of time left, but you know, there was quality months there. I think, you know, there were experiences we could have given him, you know, and things for my mum, you know, that she needed to have some good memories, I think, you know, and I knew that at that point that was probably now going to be unachievable, and it was horrendous. It was after awful. That point then, what impact did that hip have on him? Did he become then immobile? No, to be honest with you, he was absolutely remarkable. So they did a hip replacement, and we had to kind of go into battle with the hospital then over the fact that he'd had a really bad reaction when he had his tumour debulk into the general anaesthetic. Okay. And so I knew that somebody else had had the same issue with their parent and had then said that they would like to have a local anaesthetic looked at, you know, spinal block as an alternative. Yeah. And I asked for that. The first anaesthetist I saw gave me a really sort of look as if to say, you don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, do you want your dad to be in pain? I said, absolutely not. I said, but I just want him to have the best possible outcome, and I'd just like you to investigate this because I really think that this could make a big difference to him and his recovery time. Mm-hmm. And obviously we spoke to him and said, would this be something you'd want to do? Because we think actually this probably might be a better option for you. And he was like, yeah, okay. So eventually we got somebody else out, and they were like, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, we'll do that. And to be fair, he came out of it like we were thinking, oh my goodness, like what is this going to mean? Yeah. But he was amazing. And actually he did get mobile again. You know, there was, you know, something, you know, we did get, you know, even a few days later, there was, you know, my mum going in, and when she did, she sent me a video of him walking down the corridor, which was really frustrating, because I think had he have just been treated a little bit more kit gloves when he'd gone in, and they'd sort of let whatever the treatment that they use, can't remember now, for high calcium, had they left that to kick in and for him to kind of like come back round again and be a bit more alert and whatever, I think he probably could have, you know, made a better recovery, and he probably would have been all right. I mean, I think he might have had a few good weeks, and maybe that would have been it, but at least he would have had that. But then we then had to start on the, you know, he's got to be rehabilitated in some way for this hip. So it was then a case of, well, what is that actually going to mean? So I think in the end he got discharged back to my mum and dad's house, and, you know, they had some care, I think, come in a few times a day, but I think the problem with that was it wasn't consistent times and things like that. Which is often the case. Yeah. So obviously my mum was really worried that he would fall out of bed again, because I think the pain from his cancer, from obviously his primary tumours and things, would mean that he would thrash about quite a bit in bed at night. Right. Okay. And sometimes she'd moved him downstairs onto a lower bed. Mm-hmm. But even then, he'd still fallen out before. Wow. So that was obviously causing a bit of concern. You know, they're giving us sort of things to sort of foam things, but even then he was
wedges,
quite a big guy even then, even though he'd lost a lot of weight. So that was quite a concern that he was just going to roll out of bed and things again. But people didn't really seem to be, we'd raise this with the hospital with whoever, and nobody seemed particularly concerned, which was always a bit like, we're just trying to make sure he doesn't go and do more damage and things like that. We didn't really seem to get answers or support for things like that. The carers obviously were doing their very best, but would come in sometimes to like, you know, get him ready for bed at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and things like this. And you're just like, well, that's not really, you know, the other frustrating thing I found with all of this is, although, you know, he was in his early 80s, he was a really intelligent, bright guy, and at no point had any sign of dementia.
Exactly.
And one of my greatest frustrations was that they used to talk to him like he had dementia a lot of the time.
That's
and
awful.
They used to be like, oh, hi, John. Do you know what day it is? And I used to think, and then they'd say to me, oh, he's a bit sleepy. Is he always like this? And I used to say, no, he's not. Like, and this is why, you know, we've brought him in, because there's something clearly wrong. Like, this isn't normal. Well, are you sure? Like, yeah, I'm really sure this isn't right. You know, I really sometimes did have to get firm with people. You know, I had one instance where straight after he'd had his tumour surgery, I could see he had a massive infection. His temperature, I looked at him, he was white, he was sweating, and he was clearly delirious, like he didn't know who he was, where he was. And I remember asking a nurse, and she said, oh yeah, it's just post-operative. And I said, I'm really sure this isn't right. And I asked about 4 times, can you please just go and get a consultant, because I'm really sure this isn't right. And eventually a consultant came and even said to me, you've just had to pull me away from proper sick people in ITU. And I was like, I appreciate there's probably people here that are sicker than him. I get it. But also I can't stand here and watch this. Exactly. I just can't. There were times when I just thought, I'm only doing my best. I am just trying to not have a worse outcome here. I am doing everything I can to help you. I don't want, you know, him to deteriorate. That's only going to affect everybody else around. And I felt sometimes like I was battling a system that just wanted to fight me all the time. And I don't know what anybody thought I was trying to get out of it, other than I just wanted the best care for him. I wanted for him to be, you know, not in pain, you know, to have the best possible, you know, end of life care. And it just felt like I was just fighting against people all the time, and I could never really understand the reason why people just sort of battled. I never got it.
It's one of my biggest frustrations. So that's exactly the reason for this. You know, we're always, so I went through nurse training. I never actually qualified as a nurse. I wasn't well, but I did 2.5 years of nurse training. And one of the things they teach us is about something called patient in pyjamas. So what happens as soon as you get into hospital, you put your pyjamas on and you get into bed. And we all do it. And it's a psychological thing. But I think more so now they probably get people to get dressed instead of into their pyjamas. They do try and get people to get up and mobilised. But when you've got somebody sitting in pyjamas, or when somebody's not well, you see the person as they are at the moment, not well. You don't see the person they were before they came into hospital.
Yeah, very
and
much
as
so.
as a nurse, you are taught to try and see that person before they came into hospital and try and understand what's normal. What is he normally like? And as you're saying, you know, you're trying to say to somebody, look, this is not right. My dad is not right. And nobody's listening to you. And that, I understand that, you know, the hospital staff, and it doesn't just happen in hospitals, but I understand they are busy, but they have to take a minute to and I think probably the consultants and the doctors are possibly more to blame for that, but they are the ones that are stretched the thinnest, I think, across, you know, and you can understand in a certain degree, but they've got to have that human side. It's got to come back, because I'm afraid
it really is
gone.
I think people used to see his age and his condition before the person very much. And that was, again, a real source of frustration. Like, there was a time I had, you know, later on, after he'd come home after his, you know, his hip op, and he was doing okay. But obviously, you know, within about sort of 6 weeks, he deteriorated pretty quickly. You know, his tumours were growing, he was losing lots of weight. And, you know, there was clearly, you know, we were, you know, fighting a losing battle. And I remember him going back in, again, it might have been calcium levels, it might have been something else. And they wanted to move him to a ward with with dementia patients, with Alzheimer's patients, and I said no. Somebody phoned me and said, this is what we're going to do, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't agree to that. And they said, well, we've got nowhere else to put him. So I said, well, just hang fire. I said, probably quite forcibly, and maybe regret some of the words I may have chosen to use at the time, but I said, I'm going to come and I'm going to stand at the end of his bed until you find him somewhere else, because you are absolutely not on my life going to move him to a dementia ward, because my dad does not have dementia, he has cancer, and his age is just a number, and I'm really sorry, but I can't let you do it.
Well done.
I can't, because, you know, and do you know somebody else who'd been in a similar situation? Their dad had been put on a ward like that, and a dementia patient had actually attacked him.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's not their fault.
No,
but,
they don't understand.
And, you know, that's just one of those things. But I couldn't stand idly by and do that. My mum was in, done her absolute best, but, you know, she was absolutely pushed mentally to you know, completely to breaking point. Yeah. And, you know, I was pretty much there myself, but I remember this particular day, I'd had a day off. I was actually out with my children at the beach with my friend. And my friend just said, look, I'll take kids home, give them some pizza, you just go do what you need to do. And that's what I had to go and do. Yeah. And I don't regret it.
No.
Like I say, maybe my choice of words at times could have been better, but I was just so frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really upset.
Yeah, I bet you were.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happened after that point then? They didn't move him onto a dementia
ward? They didn't, you know, they got him sort of stabilised, moved into a different ward. He was there for a little while. And then we started to talk about, you know, him coming back home. And this is where it was kind of sort of like kicking on a little bit now. You know, we then sort of had, I remember we moved on to sort of needing to talk to the social work team at the hospital. That was another interesting thing, where we'd make up an appointment and then they wouldn't turn up, and then, you know, we'd have to go and make another appointment. And all this time, you know, you're trying to juggle kids, job, all these other things. It was really frustrating when you've made an appointment with somebody and then they don't turn up, and you think, well, I've now got to do the same thing again tomorrow. Yeah. And I've got all these people that are saying to me, well, are you going to come in and do this? Are you going to be here? You know, are you going to pick kids up from school? Like, what are you doing? And you're thinking, oh, I'm just juggling. I'm just like trying to spin all these plates, and I don't know at what point something's going to fall off. Yeah. It was horrific. And eventually, you know, they said, oh, we can discharge him back home, but he's going to need a hospital bed now. So we said, okay, fine. They delivered a hospital bed, and we said, well, is it going to have the cot sides? Because, again, massive risk of falls. You know, he'd had a couple of little falls again after the hip incident. And they said, well, we've got these kind of like sort of foam things again we can put at the side. And I'm just like, he's just going to roll over the top of them. And they said, well, there's nothing else we can do. We can't release a hospital bed to your house with the cot sides, which actually would have been really helpful, because that would have kept him safer. So there's nothing we can do about that. So that's when we had to sort of say, well, okay, we're going to have to start looking at other options then. So he was in Arrow Park at that point again. And that's when they sort of started to talk to us about sort of needing to moving then somewhere, you know, for, you know, more palliative care and things like that. So we don't actually know what that means. That means that we move him to a hospice. What does that look like? And that was when we started with the whole journey into continuing healthcare. Oh, yeah. Yeah, which was, you know, if I'd have thought what went before was bad, I was then about to enter, a whole sort of area of which I had no preparation and no guidance, and was just awful. I think the rules had recently changed, so the original sort of literature that was given to my mum about it was out of date, and obviously she didn't know that. So they gave us, you know, they said you need to look for somewhere for him to go that can obviously provide the right level of care. So we said, okay, we'll start looking. So we found a place that was near to the house, and, you know, I went and saw it with my mum, and it was fine. We spoke to the staff to make sure that they were appropriately trained, you know, that they would be able to deal with, you know, his pain medication and all the other things that come with end of life care when that point came. Because, you know, the last thing that you want is to know that I wanted somewhere that was adequately staffed, because at no point did I want him screaming in pain. I wanted to know that, you know, people knew how to change drivers and, you know, all of these kind of things. And so we found someone we were happy with. We went back and told them, and they said, oh, you're not allowed to do that. Why? And we said, well, why? You told us that was what we did. Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't even think we got a sorry. I think we just got a, oh, yeah, the rules changed and we didn't tell you. So, right, well, what does that mean? Well, you need to find a place that's on a list, and the place you found isn't on our list, so you can't have it. We said, well, it can do everything. And they said, yes, but it costs more than we're prepared to pay. So I said, well, okay, then it's not tons more. What happens if you pay us the base amount that you were going to pay and we'll just top it up? And they said, no, we're not allowed to do that anymore. And that they actually turned around, and I have this conversation on tape because by this point I got savvy to the point that I didn't want people saying things and then telling me they'd never said it. So I never told anybody, and probably should have done, but I used to record the conversations on my mobile phone. And they actually turned around and said to me, we don't do things like that anymore because people like you, they just choose places where they put a doily with their cake.
Oh, gosh.
And I was like,
wow.
I'm sorry, you're telling me that you think I'm doing this because I want somewhere nicer to visit. I said, I'm absolutely looking for something that can provide the right palliative care for my dad. I don't want him in pain. I want him respected and cared for. And you're trying to tell me I was...
Oh, Jayne, that's awful.
It was horrendous.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what am I fighting here? What kind of attitude? It was almost like if you can afford to ask that question, you pretty much shouldn't be even asking for anything. You should just be dealing with this yourself.
Yeah.
So we said, well, okay, what's the list then? We'll have a look at the list. They gave us it. We started ringing around places, and my mum found one that was amazing in Hoylake, and we went and saw it, and they had room available. So we said, okay, great, it's on the list, we'll take it. And how fast can you get him moved there? Because by this point, he's been in hospital for weeks and weeks on end. It's not pleasant. Which you just get to the point where obviously he's on wards as well. With you can't sleep very well because of the noise, the constant the updates of things. So we said to them, how fast you can turn this around? They said, oh, probably a couple of days. And they had really good staff that came out, assessed him, wanted to get him into it, a good routine quickly. And so they got him moved there, and they let us do all of this, didn't say a word, we said, oh, well, you'll have to fill out the continuing healthcare form. We said, well, okay, it's on the list, we'll fill out the form, did everything, submitted it all. And they waited probably about 4 or 5 weeks, I think. So we had to pay up front anyway for so long, and then they said, oh, you get the money back. So we paid it all. And I think in the week maybe before he went on to end-of-life care, we got a phone call that said, you shouldn't have moved him there. We're not going to pay for it. I was like, sorry? What do you mean? Oh, well, it might have been on the list, but it wasn't up to you to make that phone call and make that call to move him there. You should have left it to us. By the way, there was somewhere that was closer to his house. I said, I was aware of that. I said, but that place has got like a really poor rating. It's got, if you read the CQC report on it, I said, it even says that they've abused people. Like, there's no way I was sending somebody there. No. I said, and besides which, they're both on the list. You never told me.
You said,
Well, yeah, but that's our decision, not yours. And therefore, we're not going to pay you a penny.
Oh, gosh.
And the guy, I remember the guy, I'll name, his name's Mike Vaughan, was the guy that runs Red Rocks. And he was absolutely, an amazing guy and runs a beautiful home. And he said, I've never heard this before. He said at one point he was absolutely livid, and he phoned everybody he knew, and he was like, they said, oh yeah, this is like a recent thing, and there's probably nothing they can do about it. So we ended up with a £10,000 bill.
Whilst grieving, whilst going through the whole...
And I even went as far, I found literally anybody that I thought could help. I found out that somebody I knew as an acquaintance was associated with the local CCG. And I phoned him and just said, look, is there anything you can do? And he was like, no. Like, he's got somebody from the CCG to call me. And they were about as uncaring. It was like, basically, computer says, no, we've got this as our out, and therefore we're going to take it because it saves the NHS money, and like, you didn't follow the rules. I was like, well, I didn't know what the rules were. Nobody told me. Nobody explained it to me. Yeah. The first set of rules I had, you then told me were wrong, and it was a minefield. It doesn't even begin to cover the situation. It was horrendous. So you just sat there and you're just thinking, I don't know what else I can do here.
No. And you don't have the energy to do it either, do you?
No. I mean, I did. Straight after I did sort of consult a lawyer and look at it. And for a few weeks, I really did sort of think really carefully about it was more the justice of it. I wasn't, by the time at that point, the end of life care that my dad actually ended up receiving at Red Rocks was exemplary.
Yeah.
The staff were caring. They made sure he wasn't in pain. They were cared for us. They made us meals. They took the time out to make sure mentally we were doing okay. They even said to us, this is something that you will remember for the rest of your lives. If there is any experience you want, if there's anything at all you want us to do for you and your dad, you tell us now, because we will try and make it happen. Because it just makes you realise that should be the experience for everybody.
Yeah, it should be.
It really should be. So whatever this race to the bottom is for everybody else, they should take that as a shining example of what care really is. They were empathetic, caring. They just did everything right. I couldn't say anything.
And that doesn't cost anything to be empathetic.
No.
That's the thing. Do you know what I mean?
No.
That's not on a balance sheet anywhere.
No, it
That's
isn't.
just being human.
Yeah, and I think that was the other thing that was really frustrated me, I think, throughout the whole process, is I found people really unnecessarily almost combative towards us, almost like we were trying to claim something that we were not entitled to in some way, and that was their, job to defend it. And we were all should have been, rooting for the same thing, and that was the best care and end of life for a patient, for somebody that had been loved and cared for their whole life, for them to leave this world respected and cared for as best we possibly could. And I didn't ever understand why that needed to be a battle.
No.
I just thought everybody should be pulling towards the same goal.
Yeah, I just don't understand why we have to have this, as you say, the race to the bottom. Like, from a provider point of view, I see both sides.
Yeah.
So I see, especially care on the community, we take predominantly private clients because we cannot afford, as a company, to accept socially funded clients because they don't pay us enough. And the client themselves has no control over that because they're not privy to those decisions, but it's decisions of the council of what they pay us.
Yeah.
Essentially, they're not funded enough by central government, but they don't pay us enough for us to be able to do all the things that we need to do to keep somebody safe, keep the staff safe, provide all the training that's needed, and, give the staff a decent salary that they can live on.
Yeah.
And probably somebody, you said you're in finance, obviously you understand, they're trying to balance the books on their
Absolutely.
end, but something fundamentally needs to change because we can't keep this cycle going the way it is, because essentially what happens is the people who pay privately end up paying more to subsidise the funded care, and that shouldn't happen. And then you get incidents like this. And I think CHC funding has always been difficult to get. It's one of the most difficult things to get, I think. And I think they rely on the fact that people are bamboozled by
Absolutely.
people almost bullying them into the decision of, well, you don't qualify for that, and they haven't got the energy to fight it, or the knowledge to fight it, or the funds to fight it. And then you end up in a situation like you ended up in.
I mean, I just, you're right, when I read the guidance, I can't remember, it was something like 40 pages long.
Yeah.
When I got hold of it, because obviously the first thing you do is, well, I deal with contracts and say financial decisions every day. I'll just get hold of the contract and I'll understand it, and I'll find out, what I need to do. And you think, wow. And then you realise this is also a complete postcode lottery. Like this was, a local interpretation of it. If I'd have gone to another county, it would have been different again.
And exactly that,
and
it is.
And that's wrong in itself. Somebody that needs that level of care in London should be treated exactly the same in Liverpool.
Exactly.
This should not be some kind of postcode lottery either.
No.
People just need to be respected and treated well at the end of their lives. And the families just shouldn't be treated as if we're asking for, something that, requires a lottery win, which effectively was how we were spoken to.
Yeah.
It was like we were asking for, to send him on a 5-star holiday or something. It was just not what I was expecting. I was expecting, a little bit of collaboration. Like, okay, great guys, you found, you've helped us out. We've found somewhere for him to go. Or even a bit of a heads up, in advance of him going there. I'm really sorry, but we're not going to be able to fund that. It was the fact they let us move him and get him so far then to turn around and go, oh, yeah, you were wrong doing that. It just begged belief.
So was he allocated a social worker, or was this all done through nursing staff?
It was all done through nursing staff. He was never allocated a proper social worker. No. And I think the teams were changing a lot at the time as well. Like, they were dealing with new rules that, you know, the person we'd see at the start of a process wouldn't be there at the end. So it was very disjointed, and I think that's probably where a lot of miscommunication comes in as well, because like one person thinks you might have been told somebody by somebody that was in that role 2 weeks before. Yeah, and then realise, you know, down the line, oh, you didn't know that. No, oh well, never mind. It was really bad, and it might have been a point in time thing. It might have been that we just had a really bad experience, but having spoken to other people, I don't think we're unique in this. I think there's a lot more of it around.
It is a difficult area, and I think it also puts people off from applying for it as well, because they don't want to end up in the situation you found yourselves in, because really, you didn't really have much choice, did you? You know what I mean? You had to find somewhere for your dad to go. You found it. You did what you thought you were supposed to be doing, and then to find this happened. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
To be honest, I think we've come to peace with it. Like I say, I think at first I was angry, and I did, like I say, I consulted a lawyer after he died. I think because I needed to feel as though I was doing something, and I wanted more. I wanted an apology. Yeah. I think I didn't want the money back necessarily. I just wanted somebody to acknowledge that they'd done something wrong. Yeah. But when I went into it, I thought, I can fight this. But I think by this point, I think my own mental health was at such a low point. Yeah. I think I just thought, you know what, if I don't jack this in now, I'm probably really going to tip myself to a point that I just don't want to go to. And I don't think that's going to help anybody. Want that either, no, he absolutely wouldn't want that. And he didn't really ever know the lengths. You know, I remember one night I was sat in our park with him on my own, and he said to me, got hold of my hand, and he said, "I'm so grateful to you and your mum for everything you're doing for me." And I said, I wouldn't. You don't have to thank me. I wouldn't. You know, you do the same for me. Yeah. And I wouldn't do anything any different. Yeah. So I did everything I possibly could. Like I say, I could have maybe done it a little bit more elegantly at times, but I did everything for the right reasons. And you know, with his care was always my primary concern. So if on that basis, I wouldn't change it. No. And I'm at peace with the whole thing now. Yes, it was, you know, it was expensive. And, you know, if you think about everything that my mum would have had to have put up with straight afterwards, you know, sorting out a funeral and things like that, it was an added pressure she didn't need. And as a family, we all had to come together to, you know, to help with that. But ultimately, I wouldn't change the care that he had. If there was, you know, I wouldn't have saved anything by going somewhere different, because, like I say, the care he received at the end was just exceptional.
Oh, that's brilliant to hear.
So, yeah, I just wish that there was a way that everybody got to experience that.
Well, that's what we hope might happen. But we try every day.
Positive change, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for coming in and speaking to me.
Oh no, if it helps anybody at all, just to know that you're not alone.
That's it.
And I think the other thing is, as well, is for me, I probably let my own cup go a bit too low during that time. Yeah. And I would not do that again, because I think ultimately it took me quite a long time. And I just, at no point did I ever sort of tell anybody, I think, ever just how low that took me and how long it took me to come back from that.
I would completely resonate with that, completely.
And so my friends would say to me, you know, take some time off sick, go off sick. And I never ever did. I worked every day that I could. And, you know, I still wouldn't say I would go and take some, you know, I wouldn't, you know, sort of go off, you know, and just call myself sick for that kind of thing. But I think I would, with the benefit of hindsight, should have taken a bit more time out and sort of maybe, you know, taken myself off for a few walks and got myself out of it a little bit more. Because I think that would have helped a little bit more, maybe calmed me down in a few situations where I just, there were days when I just wondered how much more I could possibly take.
I was at an event last week and we were talking about bereavement in the workplace, and we talked also about anticipatory grief in the workplace and how employers can support their staff to cope with that. And so It's so important, isn't it,
Very
that you
much so.
know your staff and you recognise that there's something going on, and it could be that it is anticipatory grief because
yeah.
your performance will not be the same as you probably were not aware of it at the time, but perhaps those around you knew
Yeah.
that, you know, there was something, and, you know, cut her a bit of slack because she's going through a lot.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, I would hope as a manager I would
Yeah.
recognise that and want to support, because having been there myself,
Yeah.
you can't be in two places at once,
No.
mentally or physically.
No, you
You
can't.
know, it's impossible.
Yeah. Thanks so much,
No,
Jane.
you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Take care.